All right. Are you ready, sir?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Hey, everybody. Mike Lawson here with CU Broadcast. Welcome back to our continued coverage of PSCU's member forum here in beautiful Tampa, Florida. Look who we have in the studio lounge, Mr. Tony DeSanctis from Cornerstone Advisors. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Doing great. Better now that you're here.
Oh, boy. I feel like the bar has just been set.
Oh, you said it, sir.
Oh, boy. Here
You
we go.
set it.
All right.
So what's going on in your neck of the woods?
Well,
how's the conference going for you?
I mean, it's been a great conference. It's always good to connect with folks here. We got a lot of clients here doing a lot of new and innovative stuff. So we're super excited about that.
Good.
Unfortunately, you set the bar that high on a topic that's not going to make us very happy. So,
the topic that we're going to talk about here?
yeah.
Well, should we dive right into it?
I think we got to.
Okay, it's called the Credit Card Competition Act. And little old me, who's been underneath a rock, just found out about it at this conference, which seems to be the buzz of the conference as well. So, Tony, give us a quick overview on what's going on here and why is this bad for credit unions?
So our favorite senator from Illinois, who has already done his damage and continues to do his damage on the debit side, has introduced legislation in partnership with a senator from Kansas called the Credit Card Competition Act. And essentially, the position is that the same way debit has two unaffiliated networks, they want credit card to have the same thing. Now, what they'll tell you is only for credit cards at companies over 100 billion.
Okay.
So you would think that doesn't really affect credit unions then, right? Because there's very few, if any, that are over 100 billion. But the reality is 80% plus of all the spend on credit cards is at institutions over 100 billion.
Okay.
So structurally, how are you going to do that? Right? The competition is going to exist in the credit card space with those two different networks, right? So you're going to have that single message network. You're going to have that Visa and MasterCard. And then ultimately what happens is interchange goes down, which always benefits the merchants, and nobody's pretending that it doesn't.
Right.
I think the biggest issue I have with the whole approach is the positioning that it's going to benefit the consumer. And that it didn't happen with debit. And I really don't see any way that it's going to happen on the credit side. If anything, it's going to be worse. Because what's the biggest benefit most consumers get from credit cards? Rewards.
Right.
And in a world where interchange goes, and I don't know what the number is going to be, goes down by 60%, let's call it 50%. What happens to credit card rewards in that scenario?
Yeah.
I mean,
They go by.
credit cards are inherently designed to attract consumers by offering rewards that roughly correspond to the interchange. So in that environment, you essentially are taking money out of the consumer's pocket and putting it in the merchant's pocket.
Yeah, you're right.
And the merchant says, well, we're going to give it back to the consumer. But in 2010, do you remember prices at the merchants dropping when Durbin went in?
Of course not. Drop prices. Are you kidding me?
So I think we end up in a situation where, merchants and shareholders of merchants make lots more money.
Yeah.
Consumers lose because they don't have rewards.
Right.
And financial institutions are put in a tough position because as the profitability of a credit card goes down, what happens? They can't lend as deep.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we're already in a liquidity
We're in
issues.
We're in a liquidity crisis. Interest rates are where they're at, right? We've got inflation, and we've also got, challenges in the economic environment. Now I have to reduce the margins on my credit card. If I'm going to reduce the margins on my credit card, what do I have to do? I have to be less aggressive in my lending. So my most credit needy, right? My underbanked and my more credit challenged members that I would typically lend to, I can't lend to them anymore because I don't have enough margin, right? In order to be able to do it.
So what are some next steps? What do credit unions need to do to keep this at bay if they can?
I think that's the biggest thing, right? So, there was a good discussion in the panel yesterday about it. We've got to stay diligent. We've got to stay vigilant and make sure that not only as the credit unions, but also as consumers, they understand this will have a direct impact on me as an individual. And I don't care how much money Walgreens or Walmart is making, right? This is about taking care of the consumer and taking care of the member, either because I can lend deeper because I've got this interchange, or, right, I can give these rewards to these members as a result of that. And all of that goes away, or certainly gets compressed severely in an environment where I can't do that anymore.
So is this a national or a nationwide thing, or is it just? I heard it's just certain states right now.
No. So it's a proposed legislation. So Senator Durbin introduced it in the last session of Congress, tried to get it pushed through, actually tried to sneak it into a defense funding bill at the end of last year. Fortunately, that got squashed. Hasn't reintroduced it yet in this session,
Mhm.
but we've just got to stay close to it and diligent
Yeah.
and connected to it because let's be honest, the debit version got snuck in, right? Last time, and we just need to make sure he's not pulling his normal shenanigans and sneaking it in again. So,
Well, I heard that somebody has to pay for the rails that this stuff is on too, right? So doesn't some of this fund the rails that all this stuff is on as well, or am I talking another show here?
So I think I think it's a fair question because I think the question is having that unaffiliated network that we do like on the debit side. So
Right.
your stars, your pulses,
Yeah,
and those
yeah.
right? So those rails exist in a debit environment and largely in a debit environment where PIN was the primary verification method, right? None of that has existed historically on the credit side. So none of that infrastructure is in place. None of the non-traditional Visa MasterCard networks know that business at all. And forcing financial institutions, credit unions, or big banks to adopt that is a huge undertaking in a world where, again, the only thing that happens by implementing that is you make less money.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have less ability to offer products to your customers because my technology resources are stacked up against implementing this. Now I have to worry about fraud because, we love our single message networks and Pulse and those guys do a great job. Fraud from the issuer side on those networks is not as robust, right?
Yeah.
Visa spent, I forget the number they quoted yesterday. They spend tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud mitigation strategies.
Sure. Yeah,
right?
Sure.
That's just, those secondary networks don't have that capability.
Right.
The fraud risk is another whole component of this that nobody's even contemplating.
Yeah.
Right? It's all about, in the regulatory environment, unintended consequences is always what ends up happening.
So what's the why behind this? I'm always wondering what's the why, and there's usually money at stake when you ask why. An old editor always used to tell me, Mike, follow the money and you'll find out why.
100%.
So yeah.
So I don't know this definitively, but I would say if you look at the campaign contributions for certain politicians, I think you would find what comes from merchants and merchant associations versus what comes from issuers and financial institutions as well as consumer groups. So I think that's part of it. I do think that there is a perception, and to be fair, I
heard there's misinformation out there.
Well, to be fair to the great senator from the state of Illinois who tends to champion these things, I think there's a perception out there that there's no competition in the payment space.
Really?
Right? Well, the perception is that it's Visa's monopoly and MasterCard's monopoly, right? Okay. But if you give the market time, it happens, right?
Yeah.
So somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10% of credit card has already been disintermediated by buy now, pay later, right?
Completely.
Venmo is now accepted at Amazon, as well as a bunch of other merchants, right? PayPal just signed an exclusive deal with Ticketmaster to be their preferred payment provider.
Oh, really? Did they? Okay.
So the market will figure it out, right? The market will find that equilibrium.
Right.
Maybe not as fast as it should, and maybe there are things that need to be sort of addressed in that approach. But the reality is the competitive environment will solve the problem, whether that's real-time payments and faster payments off of card rails or things like Venmo. And Square has basically created an entire closed loop ecosystem around their Cash App. So all the Square merchants, right, can enable transactions between the merchant and their P2P solution without the card rails being involved at all.
Gosh.
So there's all these other disruptions already happening in this space. So it's just, it's a machine gun for a sniper problem, right? They passed the legislation with a machine gun thinking they're going to fix the issue. And really what you need to do is you need to be more targeted and more precise. And I think it's just, I'd like to say it's not just the money and that I'm sure there's other things and there's good intentions behind it. I am inclined to think that it's more the money than the good intentions. But again, our regulators and legislators don't always have the whole picture. And so the unintended consequences are a big part of the issue there.
So to wrap up here, what can credit unions do in the meantime? Is there a timeline on this when this is going to be introduced, or is it just kind of we're just watching and waiting?
We bought ourselves some time by it not making it through the last session of Congress.
Right.
We just have to stay diligent and active, right? My running joke with this topic is anytime that the banks and the credit unions are on the same page about something, you know it's bad legislation, right? And essentially, right, NCUA and Qs and all the credit union groups, as well as ABA and state banking associates, everybody's singing from the same sheet of music on this. This is just bad legislation that doesn't benefit consumers in any way. It just causes more problems than it solves.
And those are some pretty powerful lobbying organizations. So
Absolutely.
Don't they have a say? Don't they have any sway as well? Especially when you have all of them in agreement.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty powerful crowd right there.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons they've been able to sort of hold it at bay. But again, it's one of those, we need to stay diligent and we need to stay vigilant on it because it will, the risk is that we'll fall asleep, everybody will be on vacation in June and it'll get slipped into some other legislation. And we're in that situation. I mean, this doesn't even account for most of our credit union clients have to deal with the changes to debit Durbin that's happening in June or in July, right? So they've got that issue to deal with, which is completely separate from this Competition Act. That's happening. There's nothing they can do about that. That's already going to impact profitability. Now you've got this credit card piece that we've got to stay on top of.
Goodness, what a pickle. What a pickle we're in, sir.
Well, so again, I don't know if I raised the bar or just raised everybody's blood pressure.
I think I did both.
I think we got both done. So
I think you did both. All right, Tony. Anything else to add to wrap up?
No, I appreciate it. It's good.
Well, thank you for the education.
Yes.
And thank you for making us all aware of the whole picture here, and we'll definitely be vigilant and diligent at the same time on this. So yeah, good stuff. All right, Tony.
Appreciate it. Thanks,
well
Mike.
done. Tony DeSanctis from Cornerstone Advisors. This what's it called again? The Credit Card Competition Act. So be aware of this and stay on top of it. All right.
Absolutely.
Well done. All right.
Thanks.
Good job. Good job, sir. Well